All right, so we're moving on. We're getting there. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. We're at the point now we're three-handed where I've developed a pretty nice chip lead. Where now ICM should start really being a factor for my two opponents because they're both kind of in the same ballpark with about close to 2 million, and I'm a little over 3. So that gives me a little bit of an advantage, which in theory should allow me to push the envelope a little bit, win a lot of the the nitty-gritty battles and stuff. But again, we are still very, very deep here. Nobody is 20 big blinds or less. Everyone's looking at about, close to 40-ish. So poker still being played. In this hand, the blinds are 25 and 50,000 with a $50,000 big blind ante.
I mean, certainly not lost on me is the Negreanu lack of convention and coming into today.
You love to see that in a spot like this.
Very
it's cool.
much so, because
King Queen here for Petrangelo.
if it becomes an exercise in who retained the most information while out there in the lab in terms of what the solver is dictating in any given situation, it can become a bit drab, a bit monotonous, if you will. But here we are seeing truly a broad-ranging deployment of approaches.
So Nick goes ahead and raises from the button with the King Queen. Pretty standard. He's making it a little like 2.2x, whatever. A lot of people really try to focus in on what is the correct raise size. And I will tell you this, it doesn't matter that much. Okay? Obviously there's an optimal size and 2.2 is likely very, very good, but it's not that big a deal if you made it 2.3, 2.1, 2. You can construct ranges for all different sizes. And again, in the short run, it's not all that relevant. So we're sitting there in the big blind and, it's mostly an easy decision for me based on kind of sort of what I wanted to do. And you can make a very good argument here that you can take King 10 off and go ahead and 3-bet it, and push Nick around a little bit because of the ICM stuff. I decide, let's just play a flop. And again, you can go either way with this. If you're an aggressive player who, does a lot of 3-betting, this is one that you might want to do that with. Again, I would probably prefer doing it with a hand like King 5 or King 8 rather than King 10, just because it's a better hand and blah, blah, blah. And again, we talk about the polarization issue of your 3-bets.
From Negreanu, who is dominated heading to this Jack 9-7 board by the King Queen of Petrangelo. Nicky P, the opener, to a buck 10. And Negreanu with the two-way straight draw, interacting quite nicely.
So now we're sitting on about 300K in this pot, 295 to be exact. And it's a good flop for us. We got Jack 9-7 Rainbow. This is not a spot I'm going to be leading, right? Not on this flop. I'm always going to be checking here, no matter if I had shift 3 jacks, pocket, whatever I have, I'm checking. So we check. Now Nick, he has some interaction with this board as well. He's got 2 overs and a gut shot, so it's a pretty decent spot. I think some of the time he's going to bet this flop with that hand, and I think sometimes he's going to check it back. And both are viable. Again, that's when people say, what should you do in this spot? I'm like, it depends, really. Sometimes do this, sometimes do that. You don't want to think so linear where you're like, this is always this. Very few situations come about, on flops where solvers are like 100% do that. Very few. There are very few. And this isn't one of them. So this is one where you're going to want to have a mix. He's going to want to have King Queen in his range. Let's say, for example, a 10 does roll off, and I have an 8. Whew, that could be really, really nice for him, right? Because I might think well, King Queen bets his flop. So he's probably going to get paid pretty hefty on a couple streets. So he decides to check it back. Again, like I said, I think it's just part of a mix.
Check, check, and now the Queen of Diamonds slides right in to give Negreanu the nuts and Petrangelo top pair.
Very much a terrible card for Petrangelo. He goes for half pot. Nick drawing to the chop. A little bit cold button BP 3-handed.
No doubt.
Comes with call. 175 rather.
Now the turn card is the Queen. And it's a diamond, putting backdoor flush draw. So the question now is, what do we do, right? Well, I think at this point you want to start building the pot, right? You can make a case for checking the nuts here, absolutely. But really what we're hoping is that we've got him trapped. We've got him coolered in some way, where he checked back ace-queen on the flop, or a hand like he has, king-queen, queen-10, was slow playing, whatever the case may be. So we want to bet here and get raised, really. That'd be ideal, if he does have like a set or something like that. again, like I said, you can make a case for checking, but I'm going to go for big size too, because me calling out of the big blind after he checks the flop, we sort of talked about this in a previous hand where generally when people check back flops, it weakens the range that they can have there on that turn. So you discount like Nick having pocket jacks, pocket sevens, pocket nines. Not completely, because he's a smart guy and he's going to check back some of these hands, but we can have all this stuff. You know, we can have king 10, 10, 8, jack 9, queen 9. You know, we can have more of that with our check because our check didn't mean anything. We check because we always check. His check does have some meaning. His check back is generally going to weaken his range at this node. We talk about node, it's a nerdy word for a point in a hand, right? Which is, the node is check, check, flop, and now we're on, you know, my action. Well, at this node, after check, check, I'm the one that should be able to, you know, to attack in this spot with a lot of my range. So we go for a pretty big size, 175 into 295. Again, that's a large size. We're suggesting here we have at least the queen. Okay, that's what we're saying. We're not doing that with a jack, a 9, a 7. If we had a jack, 9, or a 7, or we're trying to tell that story, that would require something more in the lines of like a, you know, quarter pot bet or 30% pot, which is like a little blocker type bet. That's not what we're saying with this bet. We're saying with that bet that we have maybe ace 10, right? Maybe we have 10-4 suited. Just like, that's a reasonable one, right? 10-4 suited, we just go bomb the turn with the, you know, with the straight draw that we've picked up and really, you know, put the emphasis on him to, with his perceived weakened range, right? Again, like I said, we discounting all those really strong hands. So if I did have 10-4 suited and I'm choosing to bet this turn as a bluff, that's the size. We want to go big, right? So we also want to do that when we have it. And that's what we do. And he calls. Now we're loving it, right? Ooh, baby. We're thinking this is it.
Oh, and a terrible card for Petrangelo. Let's see if Negreanu elects to go for check raise or just pursues big value straight away. Whatever the case may be, disastrous river for Nicky P, Ali.
Already spent $1.75 on the turn to take this card, which he imagines is a good one for him. Oh, Negreanu decides to slip it to him.
Indeed he does.
Reptilian.
$6.45 in the middle.
180.
180.
180.
Very interesting sizing choice from Petrangelo. To be continued on that.
Both of us anticipating something meatier.
Daniel goes for 580.
580.
Not often you see a vegan deliver the meat, but there it is.
Call.
Cool.
Straight.
Does pay it off, Ali.
It didn't make a meal of it.
A
either.
vegan delivery of the meat. And Petrangelo sees the bad news. What an incredible pickup for Negreanu. He says he almost checked it. I believe him.
Nicky P, that is.
Yes, he found a way to go for third, some odd, less even, and then call the raise as opposed to, let's say he goes for half and Negreanu puts him in or makes it $1 million and so on. Live to fight another day, if you will, down to 1.33.
Was 580 available to Negreanu as a bet instead of a check raise?
Yes. But, you know, there's many different ways to go. I think check raise is very logical. Nick just hits trips a lot. He'll just go for call if we bet very big. But the sizing scheme was certainly unorthodox, perhaps by both. Really good instincts from Petrangelo there to find a way to kind of avoid total disaster.
Now there's 645,000 in the pot, and the river is a queen, okay? So my thinking here is I still have the bluffs that I have, the 10 high, the 10-4 suiteds, and whatever else. Maybe even like king 4 suited, which blocks, you know, king 10, like something like that. We have those hands, and we also have the nuts. We also have two pairs. We're going to have some full houses. We have a whole bunch of really good hands now, right? We don't have a lot of like just the jack, just the 9, just the 7. Well, actually, we don't ever really. You know, we're not doing that with that size. So the question is can my range kind of bet small here? I don't think it makes a lot of sense because we were super polarized on turn, right? Nuts or nothing. So now we're going to make a blocker bet with what? A blocker bet is designed to say, I have a jack. You know, I have a thin value bet or something along those lines with some traps. So I elect to, I decide that, again, partly because of how I was sort of thinking about how I was going to play the super high roller bowl, I thought check was better for a couple of reasons. Number one, it allows him to bluff if he is bluffing, right? And if he doesn't have anything, he's missed his draw or whatever, he's not calling. But it does open the door for him to bluff. It also, it's also a card that if he does have a queen, he's going to bet. Like we're not risking not getting paid, right? If he has the queen, he's going to bet it himself. Now you could make the argument that maybe like he's going to check back a jack, sure, and we could have got some value there. Of course, the problem is the size we were going to go for might not even get value from the jack, right? It would be an iffy spot. And again, we somewhat discount jack a little bit because he checked back the flop. So all these little clues lead you to a place on the river where you think, all right, well, he checked back flop and called size on the turn. You're not doing that just naked with just a random 10 that often. So it looks like he's got a queen, ace, queen, king, queen 10, something like that. So as a result, we check. And now this is where I think there's some interesting aspects to this part. There's $645,000 in the pot. After I check, how I proceed is going to heavily depend on his bet size. And this is similar to a hand. We did a hand breakdown on Mikita by Jakowski, where I had the nuts straight on the river and the board paired. And I checked, planning to check raise a small bet, call a big bet, and fold to an overbet. How is that possible? I did fold to the overbet because he was being greedy and he had a full house. But if he bet small, I would have raised. If he bet large, I would have just always called. But the overbet, he was polarized here. I didn't buy that he had the bluffs in his range that he was trying to sell me. Okay? So I was like, no, you're way too value heavy with this. You're being greedy because old D-Negs is a payoff wizard. Nope, not going to do it. So in this spot, I'm assessing now with 645 in the pot. If Nick bets pot, I'm calling. If he bets 2/3 pot, I don't think I can check raise that river. With like, I think it's too thin, right? Because again, he still can have full houses here, guys. He can have queen 7. He can have queen 9 very reasonably, checking back the 7 or the 9 on the flop, turning queens up, not raising the turn with the straight board there, and now bombing river. Those are all reasonable. So I'm not raising his large size. If he overbets, that's a tougher one, but I'm probably going to call because I'm way too high up in my range to fold there. So I'm calling against big, calling against overbet. But what if he bets what he did, which is 180 into 645? Now what? One of the dangerous things you don't want to do too often against really good players is try to squeeze out a little extra value, but open yourself up in spots where your range is too capped, and then your opponent says, aha, you check raise me, but Daniel, I'm the one with the full houses, not you, right? So you have to be careful of these situations, but this isn't one of them, right? As we said, a lot of the, the sets on the flop, he's betting for the most part. The two pairs on the flop, well, the two pairs are no longer a full house. The sets on the flop, whatever. Point is I can have a full house here. So when I check raise this river, like king 10 is at the bottom end of it. I'm going to have a lot better hands than that. So this is as thin as I'll go here with the check raise. I probably don't even, maybe ace queen is as thin as I'll go here. King queen is really on the borderline against this size. But again, you have to ask yourself this question. When you're doing this, can you be repping the hand that you're saying you have? Can I have queen jack? Can I have the nuts here? 100% I can have the nuts. Who's more likely to have the nuts? Me. I know that sounds crazy, but because he checked back the flop, which he's going to do at a frequency, he's going to be betting it more often. When I have queen jack, I'm 100% checking this flop. 100%. He's not. So that sort of takes away some of his. You can make other arguments about pre-flop. He's going to have slightly stronger hands that he opens with versus what I defend with. But that's sort of a side argument that we don't need to delve into. So with 180 in the pot, I decide to make a hefty raise to 580,000. All right. And, Nick thinks for a little bit while, and he finally makes the call. Now, some of you may have said, well, Daniel, why didn't you just bet 580 yourself? He would have called that. I'm like, you're right. You're absolutely right. But again, I thought he had, a good chance he has a queen here, right? Again, so Daniel, if you think he has a queen, why not just go ahead and bet? And that's a fair argument. I open the door to potentially have him bluff, I guess is what I would say. And in the end, I got paid pretty close to what a bet would be because the pot was 645 and I got paid 580. So had I bet, I probably would have bet a little less than that. I probably would have bet 2/3 pot. In this case, I got just a little bit more I squeezed out. But it's a super interesting hand. I think you got to think about every time you're making a play, what are you opening the door to as well, right? What are you opening the door to? And anytime you open the door to a spot where you can't have the nuts and your opponent can against really good players, that might not be a door in a tournament that you want to open up. I know Ben Lamb, he said this in a PLO tournament. He's a great tournament player. And I listen to what everything says. He said something about he kind of likes putting himself in those spots. He likes, he loves it. He loves he loves calling. Sometimes he calls it off and gets felted. Sometimes he makes the hero call when the guy's making the move. But that's some very, very high level thought process that you need to have to play in that regard. So the safer route often is think about spots in terms of, can I have the nuts here? And if not, is my opponent capable of raising me as a bluff? And would I be folding against that? So the more convoluted and complicated it gets, the more likely you just take the safe route, especially in a tournament, and call. This is a case where the situation really felt like it warranted against that size of raise. And that's what I did. You know why? Because I'm really fucking good. That's why.